People always say karma takes time. They were right. I never imagined a phone call in a grocery store would change everything. It was a Saturday afternoon in late February, and I was wandering through Morrison's Market in Willowbrook, my mind elsewhere. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I stared blankly at pasta sauce options, trying to remember what I'd actually come here for. Then my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten. Richard Holloway, managing director, my boss's boss, the man everyone feared. "Hey," his voice came through sharp and impatient. "Need a quick favor? You at your computer?" I shifted my weight, cart handle cold under my palm. "No, I'm out shopping. What's going on?" "I'm heading to the Northbridge warehouse site in about 20 minutes, he said, each word clipped. "Need you to turn off the CCTV system for an hour. Don't want to be on camera while I'm there." My heart stopped. The request hung in the air like smoke. Turn off the cameras? Why would he need that? Turn it off? I repeated slowly, trying to process what he was asking. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. "Yeah, just switch the feed off remotely," Richard said, irritation creeping into his tone. "No one will know. Simple IT stuff, right?" That's when certainty hit me like ice water. Whatever he was planning to do at that warehouse wasn't legitimate. But this was Richard Holloway we were talking about. The man had a reputation that preceded him everywhere: short-tempered, vindictive, and drunk on his own power. People who crossed him found themselves jobless within weeks. I'd seen it happen twice in my 3 years at Clearview Technologies. I couldn't just refuse him directly, so I bought time. "Give me 10 minutes to get home," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I'll sort it out from my laptop." He grunted acknowledgement and hung up without another word. I didn't go home. I stood there in the middle of the frozen food aisle, staring at my reflection in the glass door of the freezer section. My face looked pale under the harsh lighting. Shoppers moved past me with their carts, oblivious to the decision I was wrestling with. 10 minutes later, I called him back. My hands were shaking slightly as I held the phone. "Richard, I've checked the system remotely." I lied smoothly. "I can't disable it from here. The Northbridge setup requires physical access to the server room. It's about a 4-hour drive from where I am." Silence stretched across the line. Then he swore under his breath, sharp and bitter. "Forget it then," he snapped. "I'll handle it myself." The call ended abruptly. I stood there for another moment, then slowly continued my shopping, though I couldn't remember what I'd put in my cart. A week passed. The incident faded into the background of work stress and deadlines, though it lingered in the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. Then came my scheduled security audit on a Tuesday morning. I was going through routine system checks in my small office at Clearview's main building in Willowbrook, when something caught my eye. The CCTV logs from Northbridge showed gaps, deleted segments, manual overrides on the access system. The timestamps matched exactly with the night Richard had called me. My pulse quickened as I dug deeper into the backup servers. Someone had tried to scrub the footage, but they hadn't known about the automatic redundancy backups I'd implemented 6 months ago. I quietly copied everything to an encrypted external drive. The deleted footage, the access logs, even the audio recordings from the server room that accidentally captured part of a phone conversation. I didn't know what to do with the information yet. Part of me wanted to pretend I'd never seen it, to delete it all and forget this happened, but I couldn't unsee what was right there in the data. Richard had stolen from our biggest client, Northbridge Logistics, and attempted to erase the evidence. Days passed. I went to work, smiled at colleagues, attended meetings, but the weight of what I knew pressed on my chest constantly. Then came my stupid mistake, the tiny slip that would cost me everything. I was in the break room on a Friday afternoon, making coffee while Tom Fletcher from finance complained about the Northbridge account. Tom was a decent guy, mid-40s, with gray threading through his brown hair. He'd been with the company for 10 years. "Northbridge is furious about missing inventory," he said, stirring sugar into his mug. "Thousands of pounds worth of stock just vanished from their warehouse." Without thinking, I replied, "Yeah, it's strange. The CCTV footage from that night was wiped manually. Doesn't line up with standard procedures." Tom's spoon stopped mid-stir. He looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly. "How do you know that?" My stomach dropped. I tried to shrug it off casually. Just saw it during a routine audit last week. Nothing major, just odd. He nodded slowly but didn't say anything else. We finished our coffee in uncomfortable silence, and I returned to my desk with a growing sense of dread. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, my phone rang. Richard's extension. My hands went cold. "Come to my office," he said simply, then hung up. The walk down the corridor to the executive floor felt like walking to an execution. Richard's office was all glass and chrome, designed to intimidate. He sat behind his massive desk, perfectly still, watching me enter. "Close the door," Richard said quietly. Too quietly. That's when I knew I was in trouble. I sat in the chair across from him, trying to keep my expression neutral. He leaned back, fingers steepled, studying me with those cold gray eyes. "Doing some extra auditing, are we?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk over razors. "Digging into things that don't concern you?" My mouth went dry. Tom must have mentioned our conversation. "Just standard security checks," I said carefully. "Part of my regular maintenance schedule." Richard smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. That thin, predatory curve of lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Good," he said softly. "Keep it that way. Remember, we all have our responsibilities here. Don't go looking for problems where there aren't any." "Of course," I managed. "You can go." I stood on shaking legs and walked out, feeling his eyes burning into my back. Everything changed after that meeting. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Richard's tone in emails became curt, almost hostile. I was suddenly excluded from planning meetings I'd always attended. Projects I was leading got reassigned without explanation. My direct manager, Patricia, seemed confused by the changes but couldn't override Richard's decisions. I could feel the noose tightening. Richard knew that I knew, and he was looking for a way to eliminate the threat before I could expose him. Every day at work became an exercise in paranoia. I backed up more files, documented everything, and waited for the hammer to fall. Then, in mid-March, everything else fell apart. My mom, Eleanor, had been battling heart disease for 2 years. She was only 63, but the illness had aged her terribly. She lived in Ashford, about an hour from Willowbrook, in the same house where I'd grown up. On a Thursday evening, I got the call from my sister Caroline. Mom had collapsed at home. She was in Ashford General Hospital, stable but deteriorating. I drove through the night to be there. The doctors were gentle but honest. Her heart was failing faster than expected. She had days, maybe a week. Caroline and I took turns sitting with her, holding her hand, talking about everything and nothing. Mom would drift in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing us, sometimes lost in fevered confusion. I took 3 days of approved emergency leave. My manager, Patricia, knew about the situation and sent a kind message telling me to take whatever time I needed. HR had it all documented. But by the 3rd day, Mom wasn't improving. She was getting worse. The doctor said it could be hours now, so I stayed. What else could I do? Leave my dying mother alone to go file reports? 3 days became 5, then 7. Caroline had her own family to care for, 2 young children who needed their mother. She visited when she could, but I was the one keeping vigil. I slept in the uncomfortable hospital chair, ate vending machine food, and watched the monitors tracking Mom's failing heart. On the 8th day, a Sunday morning in late March, I was sitting beside her bed. Early spring sunlight filtered weakly through the hospital window. Mom's breathing had changed during the night, becoming shallow and irregular. The nurse had warned me this was the final stage. I held her hand, thin and fragile as bird bones in mine. "It's okay, Mom," I whispered. "You can rest now. Caroline and I will be fine." She squeezed my hand, just the faintest pressure. Her eyes opened briefly, unfocused but somehow still seeing me. Then her breathing stopped, and the monitor's steady beat became one long tone. The funeral was held on a gray Wednesday at Ashford Cemetery. About 40 people came, mostly Mom's old friends and a few distant relatives. Caroline and I stood together as they lowered the casket, and I felt numb, disconnected from my own body. The following Monday, I returned to work. I'd been gone for 12 days total, 8 past my approved leave. I knew there would be consequences, but I assumed we could work it out. These were extenuating circumstances, after all. My security badge didn't work. I swiped it 3 times at the front entrance, but the light stayed red. Confused, I knocked on the glass door. The receptionist, Kelly, looked uncomfortable as she let me in manually. "I think HR wants to see you," she said quietly. "They're waiting in conference room B." My stomach dropped. I walked down the familiar corridor, my footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Richard was already seated in the glass-walled conference room, along with Patricia and someone from HR I didn't recognize. The HR woman was young, maybe 30, with an expression of professional sympathy that looked rehearsed. "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to the empty chair across from them. I sat. Richard looked at me with that same predatory smile I'd seen weeks ago, barely concealed satisfaction in his eyes. "We need to discuss your absence," he began, his tone falsely sympathetic. "We understand you've been through a difficult time." "I informed Patricia about my mother's condition," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It was an emergency. She was dying." Richard nodded slowly. "You were approved for 3 days of emergency leave. You took 8 days beyond that, 11 days total." Patricia shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "During your absence," Richard continued, "we lost a major client who needed on-site IT support. Northbridge Logistics specifically." My blood ran cold. Of course, Northbridge, the client he'd stolen from. "That support issue could have been handled by anyone on the IT team," I said carefully. "We have protocols for coverage." "But you're the senior IT manager," Richard replied smoothly. "You're responsible for critical client relationships. Your absence meant that relationship failed, and we lost a significant contract worth hundreds of thousands of pounds." I stared at him, incredulous. "You're blaming me for losing Northbridge?" "I'm saying your unauthorized absence had consequences." He slid a document across the table. "We're terminating your employment effective immediately for abandonment of duty and breach of contract." The room felt like it was spinning. "You're firing me because my mother died?" Richard sighed, a theatrical gesture of regret. "I'm firing you because you didn't show up to do your job. You abandoned your responsibilities during a critical period." But I could see it clearly in his eyes. The satisfaction, the calculation. This wasn't about my absence. This was about insurance. Richard had found his perfect excuse to eliminate the one person who could expose him. He'd probably been waiting for any opportunity, and my mother's death had handed it to him on a silver platter. The HR woman pushed the termination papers toward me. "If you sign this, we can process your final paycheck and benefits within 2 weeks." I looked at Patricia. She was staring at the table, jaw tight, clearly uncomfortable but powerless to intervene. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady now, steady with a cold clarity that had settled over me. I signed the document, dated it, and slid it back across the table. "Is there anything else?" I asked quietly. "You'll need to hand over your security badge and company laptop," the HR woman said. I placed both on the table and stood up. "Done." Richard watched me with barely concealed triumph as I walked out without another word. I drove home in silence, hands gripped tight on the steering wheel. My flat in Willowbrook felt empty and cold when I walked in. I set my bag down, made tea I didn't drink, and sat at my kitchen table staring at nothing. Grief and rage swirled together inside me, but underneath both was something harder, sharper: determination. I wasn't done. Not even close. That evening, I pulled out the encrypted external drive I'd hidden in my desk drawer. The one with all the evidence. Deleted CCTV logs, access records, timestamps, audio recordings. Everything that proved what Richard had done. For the next 2 weeks, I lived like a ghost. I barely left my flat. Caroline called to check on me, worried about how I was handling everything. I told her I was fine, just processing the grief. I didn't mention losing my job. I spent 12 to 14 hours a day compiling evidence, organizing it into an airtight case. I cross-referenced shipping records that were publicly available through Northbridge's supplier portal with the timestamps of the deleted footage. I enhanced audio recordings from the server room that had accidentally captured part of Richard's phone conversation that night. I documented every attempt he'd made to cover his tracks. Then I drafted 2 identical packages of information. Each contained the restored CCTV footage showing Richard loading boxes into his personal vehicle at the Northbridge warehouse at 11:47 p.m. on February 27th. The deleted system logs and his manual override codes. The audio recording where his voice was clearly identifiable. Shipping manifests showing the missing inventory. A timeline of events with supporting documentation. I included no personal information about myself, no accusations, just data, cold, irrefutable data. On April 15th, I created an anonymous email account through a secure VPN and sent the day's first package to Northbridge Logistics. Attention, Head of Security and Loss Prevention. The email was brief. Your company has been the victim of internal theft by a trusted partner. The attached evidence shows what happened to your missing March inventory. All documentation is authentic and verifiable through your own systems. Check your shipment records from February 27th. You'll find what you're looking for. The second package went to Clearview Technologies, Board of Directors, sent individually to each board member's personal email address, which I'd found through LinkedIn and the company's annual reports. The managing director of your company, Richard Holloway, has committed fraud and theft against your primary client, Northbridge Logistics. Evidence attached. I recommend immediate investigation before this becomes a legal and public relations disaster. Then I waited. I deleted the anonymous email account, wiped my browsing history, and went about my daily life. I'd applied to several IT positions and had a few interviews lined up. Life, somehow, was continuing. 4 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in mid-May, the news broke. I was having coffee in my flat when my phone lit up with a notification from a local business news site. Clearview Technologies managing director under investigation for fraud and theft. My hands trembled as I read the article. The story had exploded. Someone, either Northbridge or the board, had leaked information to the press. The article mentioned compelling evidence, including security footage and system logs. Richard had been suspended pending a full investigation. By that afternoon, it was everywhere. Local papers, industry blogs, even regional television news picked it up. The footage, partially restored from those supposedly deleted segments, showed a man matching Richard's description, loading boxes into a vehicle late at night at the Northbridge warehouse. Clearview Technologies released a statement saying they took the allegations seriously and were cooperating fully with authorities. But the damage was done. The story spread like wildfire through professional networks. Within a week, 3 major clients announced they were suspending their contracts with Clearview pending the outcome of the investigation. Northbridge Logistics filed a lawsuit for theft and breach of contract. The company's stock, which was privately held but valued for investment purposes, plummeted. 2 weeks after the news broke, Richard resigned. The official statement said he was stepping down to protect the firm's reputation and allow for an unbiased investigation. But everyone knew what that meant. I followed the story obsessively from my flat, refreshing news sites multiple times a day. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt empty, because none of this brought Mum back. Then, 3 weeks later, came the bigger news. Clearview Technologies was filing for bankruptcy. The combination of lost contracts, legal fees, and reputational damage had been too much. The company that had existed for 15 years was folding completely. I should have felt guilty. Hundreds of people worked at Clearview, good people like Patricia and Kelly and Tom. They'd all lost their jobs because of what I'd exposed. But I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Richard had stolen from clients and fired me for caring for my dying mother. He'd used his power to hurt people without consequence for years. Someone had to stop him. By July, I'd secured a new position at Riverside Technical Solutions, a smaller but growing company based in Millbrook, about 30 minutes from Willowbrook. The pay was better, the culture seemed healthier, and my new manager actually seemed to care about work-life balance. Meanwhile, Richard's life had imploded completely. Through the professional grapevine, I heard stories. Every company he applied to turned him down. Recruiters who'd once courted him now ghosted his calls. His reputation was utterly destroyed. The fraud investigation was ongoing, and criminal charges were likely. One evening in late August, I drove past the old Clearview building on my way home from Riverside. It was empty now. Windows dark, a for lease that sign planted in the yellowing grass out front. I slowed down, looking at the place where I'd worked for 3 years. The parking lot was cracked and weed-filled. Through the ground floor windows I could see dust-covered desks and abandoned office chairs. It looked haunted, a corpse of what it had been. I smiled, not a happy smile, but a satisfied one. Justice had a strange way of manifesting, messy and imperfect but real. That Saturday, I drove to Ashford Cemetery for the first time since the funeral. It was a warm summer day, clouds drifting lazily across blue sky. I found Mum's grave under the oak tree where we'd buried her. The headstone was simple. Eleanor Grace Morrison, beloved mother and friend. I knelt down and placed a single white lily on the grass, her favorite flower. For a long moment, I just sat there in silence, feeling the sun on my back and the breeze moving through the cemetery. "Hey, Mum," I said quietly. "I'm sorry I haven't been to visit sooner. It's been a difficult few months." The words felt inadequate, but I continued anyway. "You'd laugh if you knew what happened. Remember I told you about Richard, the awful boss? The one who made everyone miserable? Well, he finally got what he deserved." I told her the whole story, speaking softly to the headstone, about the phone call, the evidence, the firing, the exposure. When I finished, the wind moved through the oak tree above, leaves rustling like whispered conversation. For the first time since she died, I didn't feel powerless. I didn't feel like a victim of circumstances beyond my control. Grief changes you. Everyone says that, but you don't really understand it until you're living inside it. Losing Mum had broken something in me, but it had also revealed something I didn't know was there. A core of steel, a refusal to accept injustice quietly. I'd spent my whole life being the good employee, the reliable person, the one who followed rules and didn't make waves. But when Richard had crossed that final line, using my mother's death as an excuse to protect himself, something had shifted. I discovered I could fight back, quietly, methodically, patiently. And sometimes justice wasn't about courts or official channels. Sometimes it was about exposing truth and letting consequences unfold naturally. Over the following months, life settled into a new normal. I excelled at Riverside, earning the trust of my team and management. Caroline and I grew closer, united by our shared grief and the process of settling Mum's estate. In November, 8 months after everything had happened, I ran into Tom Fletcher at a coffee shop in Willowbrook. He looked older, more tired, but he smiled when he recognized me. "Hey," he said, approaching my table. "How've you been?" "Good, actually," I replied honestly. "Found a new job at Riverside. You?" "Yeah, landed something at Henderson Associates. Took a pay cut, but it's stable." He hesitated. "I heard what really happened, about Richard and Northbridge. Someone told me you were the one who had access to those security systems." My expression didn't change. "I don't know what you mean." Tom nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Right, of course." He paused. "For what? It's worth. I'm sorry about how everything went down. About your mum, about Richard firing you. That was wrong." "Thanks," I said. "I appreciate that." We talked for a few more minutes about mundane things, then parted ways. They say grief reveals who we are, stripping away pretense until only truth remains. But I learned something else. Betrayal reveals who others are, showing their true character when they think they have power over you. Richard had thought firing me would erase the problem, that removing the witness would bury the crime. He'd miscalculated badly. Truth doesn't die when you silence someone. It waits, patient and persistent, until the right moment arrives. And when truth finally speaks, it doesn't whisper, it roars. I think about that phone call in the grocery store sometimes. That moment when Richard asked me to turn off the cameras. If I'd said yes, if I'd helped him cover his tracks, everything would have been different. I'd still have my job, Mum would still have died, and Richard would have kept stealing, kept abusing his power, kept hurting people. But I'd chosen differently, even without knowing where that choice would lead. And in the end, that choice had mattered. Evil had hidden behind corporate policy and power structures. But justice had hidden in patience, in carefully gathered evidence, in the willingness to wait for the right moment. Both had shown their faces eventually, and I could live with how that story ended. In the end, the truth doesn't hide forever. It just waits for the right moment. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me for the next one. People always say karma takes time. They were right.